Welcome to the Kennedy Report, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kennedy Hall. I'm here with Joe Boca. He's here to help. Joe, how you doing?
Doing well today, Kennedy. How are you?
Living the dream, living the absolute dream. We're going to talk about Malachi Martin today. And just a brief overview, he is one of the more controversial figures in the church of the 20th century. Let's put it that way. But he has a lot to say. And we're going to go over some of the Cole's notes about him. Basically, basics about his life. And then I do have an associate who was a close friend of Malachi Martin, who wants to come in on at some point and talk about these realities. So Joe and I are going to kind of do sort of a general overview. What is the Malachi Martin shtick? What is that about? What do we actually find pretty useful in it? What do we believe? And then within, relatively soon, we'll have this friend of mine on and we'll go over it. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we have to thank our sponsor over at Noble Gold. Very happy with this sponsor because, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this show, you're probably somebody who thinks for yourself. Thus, you probably know that trusting the government with all your money is one of the dumbest things you could ever do in your life. Did you know silver prices are low right now because investors are selling their holdings because of a turn down in demand? Once fears subside, though, we could see a surge in demand for silver as consumers come back. This is a perfect time to get your silver IRA started with Noble Gold. And this month, you'll get an incredible free 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with a qualified IRA of $20,000 or higher. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call the team now at 1-877-646-5347. That's 1-877-646-5347. To find out more, visit noblegoldinvestments.com. And you'll notice, ladies and gentlemen, in my video, you'll find an actual link that you can click in the description to my video where you can go right there. It is an affiliate link, so they know that I sent you over there. Thank you to Noble Gold. This is a very useful product for people. I know that living under Justin Trudeau, for example, if I can have somebody else managing my money and my retirement other than the federal government who likes to stomp the truckers and so forth, then I'm probably going to go for that. All right. What's that noise in the background, Joe?
My landlords have a bit of construction going on over here.
Okay.
It's been somewhat intermittent. So hopefully it won't be going on too much of while we're doing this. If anything, I could step outside, but.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So who is Malachi Martin? Joe, you're a little bit more of a Malachi Martin expert than I am. Can you give us the Cole's notes on who Malachi Martin is, in your opinion?
Yeah, far be it to call myself an expert, but I'm a big fan of Malachi Martin. There's a lot, as most of your viewers probably know, and if they don't, he's definitely a character who is debated about to this, even to this day among traditional Catholics. Most of I'll tell you, the divide seems to be among Sedevacantists seem to not like Malachi Martin very much. Novus Ordo Catholics seem to not like Malachi Martin very much. So he would probably be a favorite of the recognize and resist wing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Although there's some speculation as to some Sedevacantist links towards the end of his life, but whatever, that's another story for another day. Yeah. He was a Jesuit priest. In the 60s, around Vatican II, he was in the liberal wing of the church. He was a scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Mm-hmm. All Jesuits are doctors, from what I understand. So they all hold doctorates. So he was a renowned intellectual. Basically,
he spoke a lot. He understood a lot of languages. He was kind of like a Father Elijah in a sense. And if you know that book, he had all these crazy languages and archaeological and biblical expertise and so forth, as far as I can understand.
Right. He was a close associate of Cardinal Bea, and I think he was Cardinal Bea's secretary. And maybe you'll know this. Was he a Paridi at Vatican II or no?
I don't know, actually. We can ask that to his friend when he comes on.
We'll have to ask him that. So, and as time started to go on, and as the crisis in the church started to go on, he does start to move to the right, so to speak, and he eventually leaves the Jesuit order, and he does remain a priest, but he's basically laicized, and
He's basically secular. He's like secularized. He just sort of
right,
lives a life
right,
as a scholar and an author, but obviously you're always a priest.
and says mass. He continues to say mass. There is a lot of well-founded. It's probably more than mere speculation to say that he was a bishop.
Yeah.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of meat on the bone there. So,
Yeah. Also, I would say one of the seminal moments for him is that he witnessed an exorcism.
yes.
And that's so people will ask, well, how is Malachi Martin an exorcist? Well, if you're ordained a bishop, you're an exorcist. You have the power of exorcism as a bishop,
Right.
generally speaking, over your diocese, at least. I don't know what that means. Maybe a supply jurisdiction on individuals. I have no idea. But the point is, bishops have the faculty of being exorcists. So he witnessed an exorcism, and I've listened to a bunch of his interviews, and essentially he said, even though he was sort of in this liberal wing of things, and understand the term liberal at the time of the council means something very different than it means today. It was a trajectory of theological opinion. So it wasn't that the liberals denied the supernatural. Like Paul VI was a liberal. Paul VI did not deny the supernatural. He wrote the Credo of the People of God later in his pontificate. I mean, he clearly believed in heaven and hell and all these sorts of things, but he was wrong about his philosophy. Okay,
more of a liberal in like the way Ratzinger was a liberal.
That's what I mean. That's what I'm getting to. So,
yeah.
It's like Robert Barron. Robert Barron is Father Robert Barron, Bishop Robert Barron is Bishop Robert Barron is a conservative in a moral sense, and he's a liberal theologically. And as much as I may have issues with Bishop Barron, I would never say he doesn't believe in like angels and like the supernatural or something like that. He's not a complete he's not a complete and utter atheist or something. I'm not even close. Right. But he'd be theologically a liberal. But things have gone so crazy to the left that guys like him are embraced by conservatives. Okay, so Malachi Martin, I would say, if we were to make a comparison, he'd have sort of that very intellectual liberal Catholicism, which is consummate with men like Paul VI and Bishop Barron. Nothing
sort
like
of,
Go on.
Sort of like you hear Nouvelle Theology and all of that. Yeah.
Nothing like a Father Martin, though. Nothing like a Father Jim Martin.
No.
Nothing like that crazy Italian guy who was in the bicycle shorts with the rainbow mass at the the cycle thing. Like nothing like that. This is not what we mean. We don't even want to say.
No, are you thinking it equivocally in that?
Exactly. We don't want to say liberal. That's what you think. So because we don't want to sully his reputation. But that was a theological school, and the idea is that he sort of saw this exorcism, and that was part of a larger conversion. It was like, whoa, and he became kind of a traditionalist in a sense, and then he really much was as his life went on. There's a video of his online. There's lots of them. This one's from Malachi Martin audio. I'm going to share the screen right here. We're going to listen to a little bit together here. We're going to pause it, and the reason I want to do this is because he talks about the enthronement. He talks about it's in this 5 minutes or so. We'll kind of listen, pause, and we'll keep going. 3 ideas. One is this enthronement of Lucifer in the Vatican. So basically, what does that mean? If you've ever had the Sacred Heart enthroned in your home, okay? This is sort of a pledge of a promise of the rights of Christ, the Sacred Heart in your home. And this is something you make as a family, and this is an act of faith. The sort of diabolical opposite of that would be something like an enthronement of Lucifer. It's kind of like if there's a blessing, that's a curse. Okay. There's this idea that there was an enthronement of Lucifer in the Vatican around the time of the Second Vatican Council. He talks about this there's an article as well that I forgot to bring up, but maybe I'll open that up while we're listening to that part where it kind of clarifies what actually happened there. And then in this discourse about this enthronement of Lucifer in the Vatican, he ends up talking about this is why I entitled this talk, The New World Order and Pachamama, because he actually talks about how one of the results of this diabolical disorientation, which is a term that Sister Lucy used, two of the results was this New World Order UN charter environmentalism thing, which was synonymous with Gaia worship. And then he went on to say that there would eventually be a pope, and he said John Paul II was not this pope, but there would be a pope who basically was the servant of Satan and would institute something like Gaia worship. And I immediately went, whoa, that sounds a lot like Pachamama, because Pachamama is Gaia. It's just Mother Earth. It's a demoness, matriarch, goddess, whatever thing. And that's the same thing. You can call it a different thing, but it's the same thing. Anyway, this is interesting stuff. So we'll just listen to this a little bit here. We'll pause and we'll go through this as well. So I'm just going to share the screen here and open this up. Chrome tab, Malachi Martin, audio's on. There you go. And we'll play.
This book is that in a short time, humanly speaking, there will be no Holy Roman Catholic Church organization visible. There won't be any, and we must deal with that.
But something must have happened, like that would have caused, let's say, since the 1960s, for this organized.
Here's the. By the way, people, here's the money quote. Okay, here's the money information about the enthronement of Satan. Joe, can you hear it all right as well? Everything's
I can hear it great. Yep.
Perfect. Good.
To seemingly start self-destructing. Yeah.
Auto-demolition. Yeah, there was this consecration, this enthronement of Satan within the Vatican, of Lucifer, by the way.
Now, did that actually happen?
Yes, it's a historical fact. It was done one particular day by a certain group of people representing Luciferians all over the world, especially American Luciferians. It was done. And therefore, in a certain sense, Lucifer has power. He doesn't own yet, but I'm sure he hopes to own some pope as his man. I'm sure he does. And he expects to own some pope, not the present pope, but some pope, so that the house is really his. And the only one who can expel him is the owner of the house, and that owner is the pope. And he must carry out the exorcism.
Now,
and the cleansing of the house.
Some people who have read Windswept House, after they read about this enthronement of Satan, said, now I understand why there is this crisis in the church.
That's right.
Because doesn't it have a spiritual cause?
But it must have. It must have. And that's why I remember going to Rome there last year and speaking with a very, very well-known cardinal. And saying,
okay, let's pause that here for a second. So these are some pretty audacious claims here, Joe. He's claiming that there was an enthronement of Lucifer. And he does, in this, I don't know if we're going to listen to this part because I don't know if we're going to listen that far, but he does go on. He does go on to distinguish between Lucifer and Satan. Lucifer is sort of the top dog, as he puts it, and Satan's just another demon who's highly powerful. I've heard that before from exorcists. I don't know. But he uses the term Lucifer very distinctly. So it's an enthronement of Lucifer. So I wouldn't say it was a satanic thing. It was Luciferian. He keeps saying Luciferian for some reason. Okay. As far as I can tell from looking into what these exorcists and stuff has said, is that the Luciferian side is more of the intellectual side, the more of the philosophical side, whereas the Satanist side is more of the carnal. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've heard that from these people before. Okay. So what about this enthronement though? Has this been confirmed? Well, real quick, I'm going to just share with us here another tab. And this is a article from Remnant. We're not going to read the whole thing because it's long, whatever, but everyone can see this. Good. So this is an article from the Remnant written by Father Harrison, who is quite a traditionally minded priest. Anyway, he confirms this. So I'm going to do my Control F search here. Okay, so he says right here, in the last decade of Malachi Martin's life, he died in 1999, I became a personal friend of his and would visit him in his Manhattan apartment whenever I was in New York. In the section headed 1963 and the prologue of Windswept House, we read this shocking ceremony enthroning the fallen angel Lucifer in the chapel of St. Paul took place on June 29th, 1963, the feast of St. Peter and Paul, and the eve of the coronation of the newly elected Pope Paul VI. It celebrated gloatingly the long prepared for arrival of a pope more open to liberal changes than any of his predecessors. Around the time this book was published in 96, Father Martin told me that this date was indeed factional and that the true date of this blasphemous act of devilry, coordinated with the corresponding ceremony on the American side of the Atlantic, was actually one day later. That is, it took place the night after Paul VI's coronation, St. Peter's Square, on the afternoon, Sunday, June 30th. Malachi told me it was indeed carried out in the chapel of St. Paul, Windswept House. And he goes on to say this is why he believes him. Okay. It's near the end of it. So basically, Father Harrison celebrated a mass in reparation for this. Father Harrison with Malachi Martin, sort of at different times, different places. I think Father Harrison was in Rome at the time. And he says, Father Martin also told me the Satanic Act became known because of its participants. One of its participants repented a decade or so later on his deathbed and confessed this grave sin. Now, he goes on to say, why would you know someone's sin? The Roman priest, hearing his confession, told him he had a grave obligation to allow this shocking sacrilege to be made known to the Supreme Pontiff in order for a reconsecration of the Pauline Chapel to be made. Accordingly, he told the penitent he could not absolve him unless the latter gave him permission to make this shocking event known to higher ecclesial authority. The penitent did so, and Father Martin told me he later learned the whole story through his Vatican connections. Hopefully, there was a reconsecration, etc., etc. He says, to me, what I have recounted above is further evidence that Malachi Martin was telling me what he believed to be the truth about the Luciferian enthronement, the date on which it historically took place, and the way he came to know about it. For I find it hard to imagine him making a mass intention part of a conscious lie that he fabricated. And it's somewhere in this article here. Father Martin told me this about the thing, and he said, both of us to celebrate masses of reparation on the 33rd anniversary of this wicked outrage in the Vatican where it took place. So they both did that together sort of simultaneously. Anyway, so the point is, Father Harrison knew him well. He celebrated a mass basically of reparation, if you want to call it that, in conjunction with Father Martin. There was numerous confirmations from people saying that it actually happened. And his argument is pretty strong here. And he says, why on earth, that'd be a pretty crazy lie. To say, to basically continue to live this lie, we're actually going to organize reparation masses for something that never happened. That's how I understand it. What do you take from that?
Yeah, it's pretty well substantiated at this point, too.
Yeah.
My friend Tim Gordon did a long show on this, too. And down to names and locations at this point. So it's my understanding that the one that took place in America, I think, was in either South or North Carolina, one of the Carolinas, and the one that took place in the Vatican was the Archbishop of Chicago, the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, Bernardin, who is notorious, you might say, an actual liberal, more closer to Father Martin than Malachi Martin. Kind of an odd dichotomy there, two Martins.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So what I think, and I talk about Malachi Martin usually in the same breath as I talk about the Archbishop Lefebvre, because I think what we've been seeing is the systematic vindication of both of their work. So Malachi Martin for a long time was sort of just, obviously he had a number of people that believed him, but he was on, he would appear on Art Bell's show. Art Bell wasn't a Catholic or anything like that. And, some, what people would think of as zany stuff that would be talked about. And, then with the interviews with Bernard Jansen are probably the most edifying. Anthony Stein just said the same thing last week in his show on it. They touch on the most Catholic topics, and this is where you'll hear Martin talk more about things like the Black Mass in the Vatican and the general Luciferian agenda, which was going on in the Vatican, which seemed strange at the but we have to remember the history of what was going on. So a lot of this probably would have appeared strange at the time, because John Paul II was the Pope throughout much of when Martin was coming to prominence, actually basically the whole time. So John Paul II was, for the most part, perceived as the Pope that would kind of, without undoing the liturgical changes and without undoing Vatican II, John Paul II was sort of seen as the right-wing Pope who would sort of turn things around. So there was a lot of optimism surrounding John Paul II. On the part of Malachi Martin. So when he wrote the Keys of This Blood, for instance, that was during his pro-John Paul II era. And even when you listen to, there's a famous episode of Firing Line with William F. Buckley, where Malachi Martin is moderating a debate with Michael Davies and Father Monsignor Champlin is the fellow's name, who's a priest up here in New York.
Still?
No, used to be.
Oh.
He died. Yeah, he was up in Syracuse, which is upstate. So and that was in the late 70s. So there was so this gets lost in the sauce because people we have the full pontificate of John Paul II in front of us now. We know the beginning and the end. But at that time there was optimism on the end of Malachi Martin and on the end of Michael Davies says as much, that he's John Paul II, for instance, is doctrinally identical with Lefebvre, even so, not knowing what would happen about 10 years later, so yeah. So the point is that you have Martin as this enigmatic figure who there's a lot of accusations against him for private sins, I suppose, that most of which, if you look hard enough, are pretty well unsubstantiated. I don't really see any good meat on the bone for these arguments that people make against him. And historically, especially after the Summer of Shame, we saw a lot of what he was saying come to fruition, truly.
Yeah, and at this point, people, you should probably know that if you are someone who is telling the truth, especially in light of like the most important things of the church, you're going to be people are going to lie about you. Like that's just how it goes. Like I'll be public about it in a few weeks when I'm done this legal thing I'm going through, but I've been through this stuff for 2 and 3 years now, of not the same as that, but just like, it's crazy what you go through. Like when I was standing up for the faith in the school system and stuff, and it's like, it's just nuts. It's absolutely bananas. Anyone, I mean, this is, if you're not being attacked and people aren't lying about you, then you're probably not a good Christian. I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious there. Obviously you could live a quiet life, and, there's different types of people with different types of lives. I'm just saying in general though, like, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, that is what it is. If they, there's many maxims from scripture. If they hate you, it's because they hated me first, Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who people say bad things about is a saint. It could be true. But when you look at the totality of a person's life, and you see the way they acted, the way they treated people, what they believed, what could be proven, and then you look at the accusations, you need to look at them in light of that, if that makes sense. Anyway.
Right.
Okay, so let's continue here listening to part of this little talk, because it's going to be a couple things here that I find quite interesting.
Say to him, but Your Eminence, you have got to go to the Holy Father and explain this. He said, no, what can I do? I'm only a simple cardinal. And I said, well, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? He said, nobody. Nobody's going to do it. Nobody will tell the Holy Father the truth. And he's too busy and too worn down to do anything about this. And that's the situation. And until that is done, by the way, there are 8 exorcists working in the Vatican under Father Amort, Gabriel Amort, who's a very good exorcist. But he is not the owner of the house. He doesn't represent Christ.
So only the Pope can really resolve this crisis in the church.
Can exorcise the demons.
And this would certainly explain then why, let's say, many good men and women who have, let's say, who are priests, who are parents of children, have maybe worked here and there to do something, and maybe they can save some souls. But that explains then why all the efforts, let's say, of pro-lifers and traditionalists
come to naught. Let me give you one example, one direct. People just blink at this now, but they should. Suddenly.
Okay, I want to pause that there for a second, because what he said was this basically, they're talking about a diabolical disorientation. Let's use the Sister Lucy term. So this enthronement happens, which is basically a hex, a spell, whatever. There's bad stuff going on, bad vibes, as the kids would say. And this makes all your efforts kind of fruitless. And he says this is why all of your pro-life traditional efforts come to naught. That's actually very interesting, because that was true for a really long time. But recently, I have to be a little bit hopeful here, Joe, because that's my thing. We've actually seen some victories for pro-lifers. And in this interview, it might have been this one, I think it was earlier in it, he talks about how there is, things are so bad that there's no avenue for any Catholic to be on the Supreme Court. And he said the Supreme Court's made it very clear. This is back in like the 70s, 80s, whenever it was. Might have been the 90s when he was in this interview. But he was basically saying, the supernatural, the transcendent worldview is not allowed in American law. So we actually have seen a lot of developments in that way. And Malachi Martin was not hopeless. There are lots of things where he says, like, there will be a restoration. I know that, he talks about the Society of St. Pius X a lot in other places, and says that Marcel Lefebvre was like a gift from God and providential, and basically God acted when he needed to, and he gave us the society, which was set up to be able to operate almost as an underground movement, as the church required faithful Catholics to go underground and that sort of thing. So he has a lot of hope in him about the things. But the point is that one of the things that has happily changed since his time is this ability for pro-life stuff to make a little bit of headway, which I think is just fascinating, how that change has happened. Okay, let's continue here.
Let me say, how could that happen? In the same day, within 36 hours, this Holy Father had to receive Mikhail Gorbachev and Fidel Castro. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev is the founder of the New World Religion, which people don't know about yet. He's the founder of it, and he's an atheist, and he's a Marxist. And he has no religion. Fidel Castro is an evil man who has stopped practicing religion for 30 or 40 years, and who is being cruel beyond description. They're invited, they come in, they shake the Pope's hand, they sit down with him and talk to him. But you don't do that. You don't do that. You don't entertain the devil's people, and they belong to Lucifer. We don't do that. But the Pope did.
Now I have a question or two about Gorbachev.
Yes.
Does Gorbachev still play an important role in world politics, even though he's no longer head of the Soviet Union?
He's in a much more powerful position. Much more powerful position. He's just blown up the Earth Charter, the Charter for the Earth, which is the Charter for the New World Order, and it has its own new commandments. It's the 10th Commandment. And people haven't got around to reading it yet. But it's going to be voted on by the United Nations and become law for all nations to foment this Earth Charter, which means we revert to worshipping nature, and we regard man as an evil influence in this world, and as a pernicious destroyer and polluter of Mother Nature. And Mother Nature is everything, which is worship of the earth. Gaia is the name of the goddess. But Mikhail Gorbachev is a cruel atheist. And how could you receive him with honor? How could you receive Fidel Castro, who has prisoners dying in his famous island prison?
Okay, so let's just take that Mikhail Gorbachev thing there. So what he's talking about is the Earth Charter. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia here. And basically it's just environmentalist thing, and it has 16 different commandments in it, principles. Respect earth and life and all its diversity, all the way to promote a culture of tolerance, nonviolence, and peace, etc. Affirm gender equality and equity as prerequisites of this. Eradicate poverty and as an ethical, social, environmental imperative. It's all this crap that we hear all the time. And who is Mikhail Gorbachev? Well, Mikhail Gorbachev was the last reigning leader of the Soviet Union. Okay, what's the meat of what he said there, which this really caught my eye? For one, the scuttlebutt was that the consecration of Russia was done by John Paul II, and because the Soviet Union fell, the errors of Russia were stopped. Okay, I don't think how we can say it, considering the leader of the Soviet Russians becomes sort of a world philanthropist, leader of environmentalist ideas that basically promote earth worship. Okay, so that's another thing. But then he says that this sort of new world order, UN, goals, all these things, the 2030 agenda or whatever it's called. I mean, there's all these different things. I mean, you've heard of the Great Reset. They're all just like a different packaging of the same heresy, right? We've seen these things 1,000 times. There's nothing new under the sun. But he basically said that this is going to happen to the point where this will be promoted And he implies that it's going to happen in the church because he says, how can the Pope invite Mikhail Gorbachev and Fidel Castro into the Vatican to talk as guests of honor? And he says that what they're going to end up doing is basically promoting worship of Mother Earth. And what will we call, what would happen? It's actually the anniversary of it today, when those idols were thrown into the river. What happened 3 years ago in the Vatican that looked like the worship of Mother Earth?
Sorry, it's on
You're
mute there
muted.
still.
Yeah.
So they had, well, that was the Pachamama,
That's the Pachamama.
the Pachamama debacle. I don't know if people, obviously, because so much happened since then and prior to. I don't know if everybody remembers that they did in St. Peter's Basilica. They had this whole this whole slideshow thing with colors and these weird images displayed on the basilica, which is kind of, people forget it because so many other bad things happened, and I think that was right before Pachamama or maybe right after, and I just remember thinking how bad even that was. And then you had Pachamama, and then I just remember all these very strange. You have the strange images too from the Synod of Synodality, but during the Amazonian Synod, I remember particularly one jarring image of a woman like breastfeeding some kind of animal, and this was being displayed by Vatican officials. So Martin was not only.
I forgot about that. Sorry, I forgot about Oh,
so
my
Martin,
goodness.
we have to. I was thinking about this as he was speaking and as we were talking. So Martin was not only correct in the fact that there's like bad men in the church, right?
Yeah.
There's always been bad men in the church, right? We know that. But Martin was not only right in that way, he was right in like not only in the what, but he was right in the how also. So it's like, well, in what way were they bad men? So all this stuff from a couple of years ago feels like ancient history because of how fast the news cycle goes. But it's not like the Pennsylvania report, for instance, coming out was not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And if we remember some of the things that were in there, the particular kind of abuse that priests were engaging in were ritual. It was all ritualistic. Well, I don't want to say all of it, but much of it was ritualistic, using sacramentals and things of this sort in the abuse. You could, if you're easily scandalized, probably not such a good idea to read it, but you could assure you it's as horrific as it sounds. So his predictions are all in a very, very precise way.
Yeah,
coming to pass, and only I think we've only just seen the beginning of this, and then Russia. So we could actually, just this week, right? So we talk about. I think when Fatima, we were talking, you hear about the errors of Russia. Yes. I think there's probably more than one error.
Well, I was actually just going to say that there's so many. It's funny, there's so many layers to Fatima that you can study it for years, and then like you realize, you look at a word differently, and you go, "Oh, that means something else." And it's not the error singular of Russia; it's the errors plural of Russia. I'll just mute you for a sec while I do my idea here while that guy's drilling. So, people always say, "Well, the errors of Russia is communism," and that may be the case. There's definitely an aspect where communism is an error that has come strongly out of Russia. But the reality is that communism existed before the Russian Revolution. Obviously, it wasn't distinctly a Russian error. In fact, we might even say that communism was a Western error. But one of the major errors that has come out of Russia that a lot of people aren't really aware of is this resurgence of old paganism. So I'm not sure if people are aware, but there's actually this movement that's really popular amongst Russian political thinkers, one of whom is Alexander Dugin, he's a controversial figure. His daughter was just assassinated. He was actually an advisor to Putin for a time, and he is part of this religious political revival sort of thing called traditionalism, as far as I can see it called. Now, that doesn't mean traditional Catholicism. It doesn't even mean traditionalism in the sense where you hear that word in Spanish. You'll have these people who call themselves tradicionalistas. There's Joey's outside, left the noise. You'll see these guys called traditionalists, and it's big in the manosphere. I'm talking about, Joe, one of the errors of Russia is actually a return to paganism that people don't really know about. It's big amongst like B8 BAP, Bronze Age pervert, those guys. Pervert. So they're big into Russia because, whoops, something fell in my pocket there. There's it's this return to paganism, and this one really influential Russian political thinker, Alexander Dugin, he does this thing called Rodnovery, which is basically the old Russian pagan religious ideas, and they sort of re-syncretize them with Russian Orthodox ideas. And then these people it's this idea amongst these guys, especially in the manosphere, that there's an old traditional religion that's basically been lost. And the closest things to it are the really sacramental and really stuff-oriented religions. So old Orthodox Christianity, traditional Catholicism, Hinduism, and paganism. And this is why we've seen this complete resurgence of paganism around the world as well, everywhere in the world right now. So this is one of those errors of Russia that is kind of overlooked by people. But one of the things that's spread as part of Russian political philosophy has actually been a return to paganism. And part of this traditionalist paganism involves in it something almost like it's kind of like the stuff you see on those Viking TV shows where you have like the priest or the priestess who like summons the like power of the elements of the earth or something. There's this idea in it. Now, it's presented to men not as environmentalism, because environmentalism comes off as super cringe green ideology nonsense, but they still have this pseudo spiritual relationship with created things. So I actually think, and actually, yeah, someone here says this is big to Old Norse paganism. This sort of stuff is coming back. And I believe this is actually one of the errors that has been spread through this errors of Russia. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, you see it a whole lot. You mentioned BAP, who even his movement has its virtues in the what is called Nietzschean vitalism. So if anybody's familiar with Nietzsche, Nietzsche wasn't himself Russian. He was German, but he had his pulse on what ended up being the modern problem. One of which was weakness, slave morality, things like this, but positing the wrong solution. So that ends up often being the case with the manosphere to varying degrees. So you could speak of any number of these guys. You have Jocko Willink too, who's not himself Catholic, but has a lot of things that a Catholic could learn from, BAP to an extent. But then you have worse off. You have guys like I don't want to. I'll name people like Jack Donovan, for instance, who's one of these big manosphere guys seems to be a practicing homosexual and kind of views sodomy as part and parcel of a pagan masculinity. And then I don't really need to remind anybody of the debacle with Jack Murphy, for instance, and how bad that was. You could go see for yourself. But yeah, I think that's definitely true. And there's a lot, and this is something that not the manosphere part here now, but this is something that kind of frustrates me, is that I think a lot of people view John Paul II as the guy that crushed communism. And I don't see this. You could say the Soviet Union collapsed under John Paul II, but it's more like when Christ exercised the I think it was the paralytic or something, and the demons only they moved. They didn't. The demons didn't evaporate. They didn't disappear. The demons went somewhere else. They went into pigs. So in our case, communism is not gone. Communism relocated. So communism is in China. So there's Chinese Marxism. Chinese Marxism is distinct from Soviet Marxism, but it's still Marxism. And
well, they actually call it. I talked to Steve Mosher.
Good. Yeah.
At the conference we were at, the Identity Conference, we had an interview, and he's a China expert par excellence, and he did a talk on China. He's knows Cardinal Zen and all these kinds of things. And he said it's in China the Chinese Communist Party calls it socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's actually what they call it. So you're exactly correct in that it's the underlying philosophy of Marxism with Chinese characteristics.
Right. And in particular, I would want to point out abortion because I don't think sometimes people realize that one of the first person to make abortion legal on the books was Stalin.
Yeah.
And
was it Stalin or was it Lenin?
Pretty sure it was Stalin.
Was it Stalin? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So that was the first time you see abortion sanctioned. And now look at how far spread that is. And you don't really see any countries where abortion, there's some, but where abortion is completely outlawed. I mean, even what they call Catholic Ireland, which is my ancestry, abortion is legal.
By
here in the United
referendum,
States,
which was so crazy.
Horrible. And even here in the in the United States, obviously Roe v. Wade was overturned, but
still exists.
My state in New York, abortion still abounds, and even in a more since Roe v. Wade, a more brutal way because it's sort of a retaliation.
I was just thinking as we're talking about the errors of Russia here, because Malachi Martin did a lot of work for the Fatima Center, like writing for the Crusader and stuff. So he was big into the whole Fatima thing. It'd be interesting if he was alive today with Pope Francis's consecration to see what he thought. Relax, people in the comments. I don't really need your exclamation marks and your rebukes. Anyway, but I was at a Third Order meeting the other day for the SSPX, and our priest went through, and I'm sure there's people who've seen this before, but I had not seen it laid out this way. And he talked about the three fundamental errors of the Second Vatican Council paradigm are, well, and they're in the documents too, and that's a fact. And it's basically they're the three errors of the French Revolution. So equality, fraternity, what is it? Liberty, fraternity, and equality. And he went through the three different, and this is how Archbishop Lefebvre, when he talked about the French Revolution having taken place in the church, which wasn't a term that he coined, it was one that someone else, Cardinal Suinens, I think, talked about it. He was saying, yeah, it did. You're right. He's admitting it. Look, this is what it is. And it was liberty as in wrong-headed liberty. Liberty is a loaded term. You can obviously have a true freedom. So there's a true freedom and a false freedom. Let's put it that way, or a good liberty and a bad liberty. It was the volitional liberty of the French Revolution, meaning I'm free from restraint because as a human being, I get to do whatever I want because I'm good because of this Rousseauian idea. So that was wrong. That was the liberty there. And that's actually in the dubia that was responded to Marcel Lefebvre about religious freedom, where it said that it is Catholic teaching that no one can be restrained from practicing their religion ever. And it's like, that's actually insane because like religion human sacrifice could be religion. So it doesn't even it's impossible for that to be, the most open-minded libertarian wouldn't even be able to believe that because they would have a rule of not being able to harm somebody else. So that would include your religion. Right. So anyway, that's just insane. That was the liberty error. And then the equality and fraternity. I always get them mixed up, but ecumenism and collegiality. I can't remember which one was which. But those are, so it's actually like the three tenets of the French Revolution are in the Second Vatican Council framework. Okay. And that's why Cardinal Suinens called it the French Revolution in the church. But anyway, what does this have to do with the errors of Russia? Well, again, communism is not a specifically Russian problem. It existed before. They were talking about it long before it existed in Russia. They're talking about the 1800s. There was no communist Russia at that time until the 1900s. And we might even say these roots go back to this sort of cult of man that we see in the French Revolution. And what happens? People don't know this history a lot. What actually happens at the French Revolution? Right after they basically take over, they erect the goddess Reason, and they actually decide to change the calendars. People don't know this part. They actually so Napoleon was kind of seen as like a correction. He was kind of seen as a good guy, almost like a strong man who did something for the country that brought it back to some semblance of order. Because before that, they had enacted things like 10-day weeks, and they're farming. They basically experienced terrible farming problems and droughts and so forth. You can't have a 10-day week. It doesn't work that way. There's 365 rotations around the sun, or if you're geocentrist, the opposite, whatever. I don't really care. There's 365 calendar days in the cyclical nature of a year, and you can't just break that up into tens. It has to be into sevens with a leap year or whatever here in every 4 years or something. And so it was actually complete and utter revolt against nature, and this culminated with this. Literally trying to change how we view the cyclical nature of the movement of the earth and the sun. Like, it was that insane how far they revolted against nature. And we see this ripple effect throughout history to the point where Malachi Martin goes on to talk about something. We'll listen to a quick clip of it here. This was
it reminds me of something Nietzsche said.
What did he say?
In his parable of the madman
Okay.
From Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He has the madman yell when he's pronouncing the death of God. He has him yell, "What did we do?" And this is before, it's after. So, what did we do when we unchained the earth from the sun?
Yeah.
So literally everything goes.
Yes.
When God, and Nietzsche knew this, when God dies to society, you something as fundamental as time is altered to serve the human will.
Yeah. It's it's like Padre Pio says, how important the mass is, and he's like, it would be easier for the world to exist without the sun than for the mass. And okay, so this is, and the extent to which we would rebel against nature as part of these errors, it goes even deeper than Pachamama and stuff. And we're seeing this now. This is a Malachi Martin sort of prophecy here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll play this part here. So listen up, everybody.
Living in sin, and they have joined, therefore, a thing which is very, very important. But I want you to gaze out over a vast horizon in order to see this. The biggest tendency today in medicine, in the medical field, in the health field, is to prolong life as long as possible. And to push it beyond 60 to 70 to 80 to 90 the term of life. Their aim is to make it perpetual. And now the medical theory is that if you can replace all the organs, including the brain, but all the other organs, so eyes, chest, genitalia, lungs, pancreas, all the organs, you live forever. To do that, you need replacements. To get replacements, you need to harvest the organs. And therefore the biomedical aim of research today is to develop what they call, not humanoids, subhumans. Anencephalics with no brain, but with perfectly good hearts, perfectly good cornea, perfectly good ears, perfectly good pancreas, perfectly good everything. And to harvest them like you would, to harvest them like donors.
So this would take, let's say, it would be the next stage past abortion.
That's right.
Because let's say a baby in the womb doesn't have, let's say, all what you might be able to need for this prolongation of life.
No, it's next stage, but accustoming people to the idea of killing the babies, of liquidating human beings who are too old, euthanasia and abortion at one end and the other end. Bring it down to the living. And for today, there's no doubt about it. If you have Parkinson's disease, you're treated with matter taken from fetuses, living. They have to get the fetus alive to cut it out. Tuberculosis is the same thing. It's harvesting from a living baby. That's why they have living babies delivered. For that reason alone, they pay somebody to have a baby so they can harvest its then the.
Okay, that's pretty gruesome. Enough of that. Someone commented in the chat here, which is exactly what I was going to get to. Well, actually, he just did 2 of them. So, or he or she, Truth Seeker. And thank you. This is great content. Thank you very much, Truth Seeker. He said transhumanism and surrogacy. And those are, surrogacy has gone fashionable.
Yeah.
You're like the Kardashians if you do surrogacy.
Well, worse yet,
yeah.
Sorry, if I could chime in real quick.
Yeah.
Worse yet, with the surrogacy problem, we have alleged conservatives on the surrogacy bandwagon. Literally, did not only Dave Rubin, but then you have you see who ends up congratulating him for this. PragerU, Libs of TikTok, obviously. The Daily Wire is quiet. Nobody will say anything. But once you listen to, I listened to Pastor Doug Wilson, who's a Calvinist pastor, talk about the procedure.
It's really, really disgusting.
I'm not going to get into details, but it is absolutely, absolutely horrific. All of it.
It's bad. It's really bad. Ladies and gentlemen, I was reminded. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell. Although I always forget, I'm the worst YouTube host when it comes to that. All the big pros out there, they always do that much better than I got to learn from them. Anyway, but so he's talking here about, organ harvesting without saying things that will get us kicked off YouTube. Although I think the YouTube guidelines are changing because I've been seeing tons of videos on YouTube. I guess we'll mildly test it now.
We won't run too many risks, but
we'll just sort of, I'll say what I know that I'm seeing on YouTube from mainstream people. So for example, like I wrote an article about Piers Morgan, who's as mainstream as it gets. Love him or hate him. He's kind of funny sometimes because he's just such a stubborn mule with his opinions that if he's in support of something you like, it's kind of fun. But then he can be completely opposite. Anyway, he's a polemicist and he's British and they do that well over there. But he was a real zealot for everybody to get vaccinated. Said some crazy stuff to people. And then he was, and this is on YouTube. So the YouTube, please don't offend me. I mean, or he's got a show on YouTube where he's saying now it's clear that it doesn't stop transmission. And his video is still up. And he was talking to that astrophysicist guy, Neil deGrasse Tyson. This video's gone viral and all this kind of stuff. But you couldn't say that 6 months ago. So clearly there's, I mean, as the science evolves, I think the YouTube policies evolve, I guess. Now it's in parliaments and things like that. So it's clear. But
it's like when they when they write a correction in the newspaper. So if a newspaper article came out 6 months ago that was a lie, they'll issue the correction 6 months later, but it'll be deep in the newspaper and they won't advertise it. That's right.
Yeah. So, but one of the things that's come up with this whole conversation around vaccines and all this kind of stuff has been the deep reality of the organ harvesting that takes place for the manufacturing. Not all vaccines, and I'm not getting into the vaccine debate here, but some of them do use certain cell lines that are part of this really disgusting organ harvesting, which is what it is. And that's an evil that's been going on behind the scenes for years. And Malachi Martin was talking about it, and it took a long time for the average Catholic, Christian, conservative, whoever, even just granola hippie who was into health, to go to the point where they would actually look at the details of it and look how hard. That was one of the downfalls of LifeSite News' original YouTube channel, was they had basically shows about the reality of the harvesting that takes place. And it wasn't even about COVID. It was about the actual vaccination stuff. And that got their channel taken down, as far as I can tell. So it just shows you, how on point Malachi Martin was about the one world government, new world order thing. Because again, look at this movement, the Great Reset in the last couple of years, and everyone knows I'm very skeptical of these things, but the point is, it's a movement is my point. Like Malachi Martin, he had his finger on the pulse. Well, the mechanisms of the thing, whether they end up working or not, that's not the point. The point is the you
Knew
know,
what they wanted.
they knew what they wanted. The spiritual disorientation that drives people to think that things like that are even good. That's the crazy part. You know, and then he talks about in this thing, you know, people wanting to live forever. Well, I didn't. This you can again, YouTube. Don't get mad at me here. These are on YouTube. That's your guidelines. These are World Economic Forum videos, and one of them is about being a cyborg. And these are grown men and women who can like walk and chew gum. I assume they have driver's licenses. They have degrees. Maybe they even have PhDs, which today stands for like pretty huge delusion or something. And there's a grown woman on there. She was like Korean background, but I think she had like an English accent or something. And she was like, I just want to be a cyborg. I just want to be a cyborg. And they're saying this and then discussing this idea of downloading their consciousness and living as machines and like these machine human hybrids. That's insane. You're a crazy person. You should be in a rubber room if you believe that. But this is so deep in the mainstream thought of these academics that you can have a conference like this and be taken seriously by all the mainstream people. And you're not looked at like you're a wingnut. And Martin was talking about this 40 years ago.
Well, whether or not they will chip you is another question, but they certainly want to.
Right.
You know? So that's the thing. So yeah, you have this him being on the mark about folks wanting to live forever, and then a couple decades later, 2015, 2016, we have. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but WikiLeaks and all that, and blood, you know, actual blood rituals,
Yes,
being partaken in by very, very powerful people
that have to do with
John Podesta, Hillary Clinton, all of it, as demonstrably true.
Yeah,
it's you know, there's no debate that the people that are quote unquote in charge are quite literally vampiric.
Yeah. Well, that's
you know?
and that's, you know, it's Halloween's coming up. Maybe we should. Have you ever read Dracula?
I've read some of it. The middle's a little slow, but
it is slow. But there's super strong Catholic imagery in there. But anyway, it's an allegory. You know, the Dracula thing is an allegory for sin, right? I mean, it sucks away your life source, and then you live forever as a corpse. You know,
right.
Basically that's what it is. So, but this person here, Dave O, comments, if they only knew that we will live forever in Christ, and that's exactly it. The desire to live forever is a natural inclination in the human heart, but it's live forever how is the point. Living forever in the material sense is satanic, because it's anti-scriptural. It's, you know, every man must die once, as the Bible tells us, you know. So there's no way to live forever. It's a fool's errand. But there is a way.
Remember too that this is why they hate children.
That's
this
right.
is why they're constantly attacking children, because children have what they want. They have youth.
That's right.
And they hate that they don't have it. And for that reason, they will kill the children. And if they can't kill them, they will ruin their innocence with things like drag shows and trans ideology and all this nonsense. That it's a hatred for life and for innocence and for youth, because if they can't have it, they have to snuff out what is good in others. Yeah.
And this is why they have to go after the innocent, right? I mean, you know, they have to go after if you think about children for a second, like children represent, they represent this. I was thinking about this the other day. You know, going after children is a repetition of the same error, or the same attack of Satan in the Garden of Eden. Because, you know, like I've got little kids, and just now my I've got a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and a newborn. Okay. We have a lot of diapers in this house. And, but just now my 6 and 7-year-olds are like, they don't want to be naked around their other siblings. Whereas like my 3-year-old, he'd walk down the sidewalk naked and like laugh about it if he wanted to, and he probably would be proud of himself for doing it. And I'd probably be proud of him too. Let's be honest, be pretty based. No, I'm just kidding. But you know, it's just this little like he doesn't even care. Like it's hilarious. He runs around. It's just hilarious. And he's naked but not ashamed is my point. Like that's when you're so innocent that you don't even know like what sin is. You're naked but not ashamed. It's not just an analogy. Like it's actually a truth. Like you see this in children. This is why they have to sexualize children, because they have to attack this primordial purity that is manifested in the fact that their bodies are perfect and they're naked but not ashamed. And they have to completely pervert that and make them shameful and pervert their nudity. Does that make sense? But I think that's this attack on children is literally just the same attack of Satan that happened in the garden over and over and over again.
Yeah, and it's why Christ had to, you know, Christ becomes a child.
Yes.
You know? And they hate like Satan. They hate humility, and they hate power being subjugating itself.
Yeah.
Because they hate virtue, ultimately. I'd recommend on this note everybody read that as a counter to this. You should read William Blake's poem, the short poem, "The Lamb." He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. You know, that it is the opposite. It is the counter to their filth is innocence, purity, and meekness in the true sense, not weakness. Meekness is not weakness, but basically the opposite of dominance.
Yeah,
you know, and that is the dominance and power will be all that's left, and that's what Nietzsche said, and in a way, we're experiencing that. But
it's funny. Nietzsche was so, man, he's just your classic. He got it, but he didn't. He had the right analysis, the wrong synthesis, if that makes sense. You know, like he saw the problem but didn't know how to fix it.
Well, he saw that there was an issue, right? He knew he saw what modernity was, and not only what modernity was, but what modernity would become. I mean, this is the late 1800s when Nietzsche's writing, right? And it's amazing. It's truly amazing what he was able to foresee. The great counter to Nietzsche really is Dostoevsky, and so who was living out a Nietzschean philosophy. But Nietzsche lived and died by the sword. Dostoevsky said to, and you know this ties in well to Russia, right? Sees where this is going, sees where this absolutism of the self-will, sees where it goes, and it's misery and depravity, and returns to the religion of his youth, which is, and the religion of and more importantly, the religion of his fathers, which is Russian Orthodoxy in this case, but knew that it was necessary, or else what Nietzsche said would come to pass, and broadly speaking, it has. Well, we're there right now, but it's not irreversible.
There is something, it's not, nothing's irreversible in that sense, because, you know, that's God's providence, etc. It's mysterious. We don't really know, but it is fascinating that, like, if we think of the greatest intellectuals of the last 150 years, a huge portion of that has been Russians. And it really has been. And it's like they were either right before the Soviet Union took force. It was almost like, I mean, you know, you and you listen to much more Martyr Made than I do. We should try to get him on the show, man. He'd be so great to talk to. You listen to more than I do. But one of the ones that I listened to was his Notes from the Underground about Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and stuff. And
it's a great,
it's amazing. But you know, Russia was in a really bad way before the Russian Revolution. You know, there's this what's it called? Tendency amongst the Ortho Bros. I love me the Ortho Bros. I'm just saying there's some tendencies, and one of them is to like lionize the Tsar of Russia before And there's evidence that he was a martyr. So I guess if he's a martyr, then he's a saint. I guess I get that. But I'm just saying, like, there's this idea that like Russia was this like perfect, ordered Christendom before the revolution, but there was actually a ton of problems in Russia. There was a ton of corruption. There was a ton of, you know, I mean, think about Rasputin and like the Satanism within the imperial household, and there's probably adultery, and who really knows? And it's just a big problem. It's a big problem. And it's kind of like there was this understanding by these Russian authors like Dostoevsky, and he was not the only one, but he was sort of, even Tolstoy, right? Tolstoy was kind of a pacifist, but I mean, his intellectual contribution to the human race is unmatched, or yeah.
Right. And then you'll have Solzhenitsyn.
And then he comes out of the gulag, literally out of the gulag. Yeah. And then because of him, Jordan Peterson talks about him every 5 minutes. You know, which is, but the point is like, Russia was like this pressure cooker, you know. It was almost like they could feel the pressure mounting, and it's easy to make comparisons to Russia. But when people think, oh, we're going to be in camps just like them real soon, we're going to whatever. But when you go look at the history of Russia before the revolution, it was already in a really dark place. It was already in a really sort of degenerate place,
which I think reflects on. We could probably do a whole show on this, right? But which is reflective of what I think one of the main errors of Russia is, and that's schism. So
yeah,
Moscow fancying itself the new Rome,
yeah,
you know, and taking that for itself as an epicenter for true Christianity, and what does sin beget? You know, it begets misery, and then that error leads to the next error, which leads to the next error, and we're where we are. I saw a Truth Seeker comment about the definition of meek. I like Jordan Peterson's definition where he talks about meekness as those who have swords and know are capable of using the swords, have the skill to use them, but elect not to, sort of mercifully. And I think that's a proper definition, because it's not. People often mistake meekness for just kind of being a doormat, but it's certainly not.
Yeah, that's right. And there was nothing that was a doormat about Malachi Martin.
No,
he was definitely. This just scratches the surface. You know, is this person a troll? In the end, the only thing that matters is how well you cared for your fellow human beings and Mother Earth. No, that's not true. It's probably Anthony Abate's like alt or something. Yeah. And okay, so just before we get off here,
sign off. Yeah.
Questions. And I see the chat here. That's why if people see me keep looking down, it's my camera's right there. And then I have the computer right here. So I'm not ignoring Joe. I'm just looking at things. I would never ignore Joe.
Well, I could even look at the chat.
It's true. And Hypnicity says, I'm not a troll. I'm trying to learn. I'm Joe. I apologize. We're just having some fun. No, more than just being a good person. Everyone can be a good person, but Christ came to save us through his sacrifice. So there's more. We have to unite ourselves to the cross, and we have to die in a state of grace. In order to do so, you have to have your sacraments through the Catholic Church. Okay. What third order of the SSPX? There's just a third order. I'm a postulant. I'm not professed. I have to do that next month or something. Pray for me that I have intentions to.
Yeah.
But, anyway, it's just a third order.
If you look it up on the internet, there, I think the good Father Purdy runs it.
I think he does in the States. Yeah, I'm in Canada, so we have a different chaplain.
Right, Canada. Correct. Yeah. So if you're in the States, Father Purdy is the guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the Northern Territories of the Loyalist country. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please like this video, subscribe to this channel. We're going to have, in fact, we're going to have a Malachi Martin expert on very soon.
Malachi X, this is a mixture of Malachi Martin and Malcolm X, huh?
Malachi, yeah, exactly.
Bringing them both back. All right.
Yeah. And Truth Seeker says, I'm really hoping that the sacraments we receive in the present time will give us abundant grace. This is a really important topic. Actually, I remember a couple years ago, I think it might have been the summer 2021. These 2 weeks just all the spread have just melded together here. And we're just kind of coming out of them now. So time kind of seems like it's ticking again. But there was a lot of people who were like, man, we got to get out of the city and move to the bush and whatever, get away from all the like the globalists or whatever, whatever the description would be. And one of our priests, he was just like, this is full. He said it from this pulpit. He goes, you're going to, he's got a French accent. I won't do it, but he's like, you go to the woods, you'll die in the woods, like you'll die without the sacraments. What's the point of going off and not being near the sacraments just so you can live free from the government where, if you stay here, maybe you become a martyr, but you go to heaven. And it's like, yeah, that's true. So that's the way to look at it. What is my favorite Pope Francis quote? I don't have one. Well, how about this? Make a mess. He told everybody to make a mess. So maybe that's my favorite one.
I do. I thought it was pretty funny when he said when he came back from the hospital and said, "Well, I know, I'm not dead. I know some of you wanted me dead." But
yeah, Pope Francis is kind of he's kind of gangster. I mean, he's a Peronist politician. It's like
if he converted, he would be a heck of a pope.
Yeah, he would be. He would be. Was the third secret about the fall of the Catholic Church? Well, at least from what we know, partly. I don't think the third secret referred to like a literal. After studying Taylor Marshall's book, shout out Taylor, and his book that I narrated, Antichrist and Apocalypse, it's clear that there will be an end times. It's clear that there will be tribulations, but there's a lot of imagery in there about like what the plagues will be and how the war will take place and stuff. And a lot of these things just don't fit sort of our historical setting. But the message remains true, and the events will come to pass in a way that is prophesied. Okay, I kind of look at the third secret, Fatima. I know everyone's like they're waiting for the moment when they actually see like the arrows being shot at the bishop in white and all this kind of stuff. And like we don't use arrows anymore, so I mean archery is great, and like bow hunting seems like fun. But unless like Cameron O'Hearn or whatever, the famous bow hunter is like going to be an assassin going after the Pope. Like it's probably not going to happen with arrows and things like that. Okay, there's more to it than that, but I sort of look at it more. The what did St. John Eudes say? The worst thing that could ever, the worst chastisement that could ever befall the human race would be bad priests.
Bad priests, yeah.
So I think it's probably more of a metaphor for the crisis in the church, which is much worse. Go on.
I'm sorry. Yeah, lots of people believe too that Our Lady of Akita is sort of the de facto release of the third secret on the part of Our Lady. If you want to go research that, it's fully approved. It's at least interesting to look at.
Yeah, and that talks about fire from the sky, bishops opposing bishops and things. So we've seen all that. We just haven't seen the fire from the sky. But again, what does that mean? I have no idea. Could it mean some sort of actual you look up and there's fire from the sky? It could. But this is the thing, the vast majority of the prophecies in the Old Testament and in the New Testament are symbolic, which makes sense because they're timeless that way. There will be an end times. There will be a tribulation. There will be a return of Enoch and Elias. Oh, no. Yeah. Enoch and Elias, right? Am I right on that? Yeah. There will be a return of, I always get Enoch mixed up. There will be a return of these people, and that's great. But then there are mysteries in there. It's like they will, from a blow on the head, they will be laying in the street for 3 days or something like that. It's like, I have no idea what that's going to look like. Does that mean that he'll be in the street, people drive their cars around him? Or does it mean that he'll be shot in the head and then they'll display his corpse in you know what I mean? In an official way for everyone to see for 3 days. I have no idea. The plagues, what will those look like? It talks about angels pouring these plagues over the world and things like that. I mean, does that mean that we're actually going to see an angel in the sky, or does it mean that some sort of, Ebola thing happens? I don't know. So a lot of these things are metaphorical, and they have to be in order to be timeless. What's another question here? Is there anything? Someone says, I thought we were already in end times. What is more important, the mass recognizing a sacrifice or partaking of the host? I'm not really sure what it means. I don't know if we're in. I mean, we're in the end times in the sense that after the time of Christ, this is the last age. So yes, we're in the end times, and there's a before Christ and after Christ. As far as when we're actually going to see the returning of Christ, I have no idea. And Christ tells us we know neither the hour nor the day. So people going out there putting billboards up saying Christ is going to be here in 6 weeks, and here's a countdown clock, and buy my vitamins in order to withstand the coming of the Antichrist. He's obviously a false prophet because it's impossible to know. I mean, there'll be things that will happen that when they're happening, we'll be like, okay, well, this is probably going to happen now. But we haven't seen those signs in the fullest sense, so we can't even say that. He says, what is more important? The Mass, recognizing his sacrifice, or partaking of the host? I don't really know what that means.
You can't really have one without the other.
Yeah. Why do you guys hate the Pope? We don't hate the Pope. I don't hate the Pope, so that's not a thing. Did Jesus part the Red Sea? I don't know. Why do all the popes wear red? The popes don't all wear red. Or red shoes. Oh yeah, martyr, right? Martyrdom?
Yeah, it's martyrdom. Yep.
Yeah.
Francis doesn't wear red shoes, but
yeah. Someone says fire from the sky means fire from the sky. You've completely missed the point of everything we just said. Yeah. Okay. I think that's probably all there is right now. And yes, we pray for the Pope. So there we go. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the Kennedy. Like this video, subscribe to this channel.
Leave a comment.
Be nice to each other. Oh, do you watch anime? He's just making fun of that Matt Walsh thing where he said, I think.
Oh,
he's
the
like,
whole Matt Walsh meme, yeah.
That was funny. He's like, I know it's satanic. I don't know why, but I just know it is. So there you go. That was, if you don't understand Matt Walsh, you won't know how to laugh at it. He's actually pretty funny. Someone asked, I just came on and don't know if you discussed this, but do you think the church will go underground? And if so, how would we know where to go? It already has gone underground, and in lots of places in the world. That's just a historical fact. So if you're living in a country where it went underground in communist countries for like 50 years. So yeah, it went underground. And it's underground now. I mean, it was underground during lockdown. It was underground. It's underground in the sense that, you have to go to an independent or like an SSPX or something like that in order to find the faith in your diocese, because there's nothing else in it.
I mean, even Martin says in the Jansen video there that it'll be barely visible. I forget which apparition it is that says you'll have, all you'll have left is the rosary and the scapular. So, once we get to that point, just pray your rosary and wear your scapular.
Well, yeah, and that happened in Japan, right? I mean, we saw those talks at the Catholic Identity Conference, and man, they might be the greatest martyrs ever.
They really are. I just read. I mean, some Catholics wanted to have my head for it, but I just finished up Shashuko Endo's Silence, and to hear. I mean, it's a fictional narrative, but to hear what the Japanese martyrs went through is, it's a good reminder to pray for perseverance, because you might need it, or you probably will need it. So.
Yeah, and it's believed that the martyrs of the end times will be the greatest martyrs in history. So imagine what that would look like.
It's a pious belief that we still haven't experienced the greatest saints to ever live.
That's crazy. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And then someone says, do you know when and where the Satanic Mass took place in South Carolina? I don't, but maybe our guest that we'll be having on soon will. So stay tuned for that. Okay.
79, right? I mean, well, it was not 79. It was whenever.
59 or 63?
Yes,
Right.
Certainly not 79. Whenever, it was contemporaneous with when Bernadette did it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Kennedy Report. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the link in the description, click the notification bell. Thank you to Noble Gold. Secure your retirement. Everyone, I'm 34 years old. I got to think about these things, and having investments that the government can't just take from under your feet is probably a good idea. All right. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.